Okay, so it's going to look at another sketchbook. So you're back, John, what, about 5 years ago with
Yeah,
this sketchbook?
it's weird looking at this stuff. It's like going back in time. And I ask my friends, you know, they keep asking me, like, why do you keep your old sketchbooks? And it almost feels like, you know, having, you know, your photo album of your family members.
Yeah.
And it's something nostalgic.
Yeah.
And
you can sort of remember the time when you were doing those sketches.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's the same for me. I remember all the sketches I did in Switzerland. Right, I have the same sort of thing when I pull those out and I look at them like that roll that I did, like that 60-foot long roll.
Yeah.
And then I look at those, and that was a certain 1 week in Switzerland teaching.
Exactly.
And I will always remember that week because of that drawing sequence.
Exactly. And it's just really cool to visit kind of that time and what you're thinking about, your sensibilities, what you liked and what you didn't like. And it just all translates in a drawing. And it feels very honest.
Yeah, it is honest and it's pure. And what I love about it, too, is that when you visit them, again, and that's the thing I love in general about drawing, is that when you start with a blank piece of paper and then you actually create something, by the end of the time you've got that drawing done, you've now created another thing that never existed before,
Exactly.
and you've never seen before.
Yeah.
But now you've sort of given it life and, you know, captured it in your book.
Yeah.
And you can always go back and visit. Do you ever go back and draw on them again, or scan them and then revisit and draw over the top?
You know, I've tried that a few times, and I found myself just completely redoing everything.
Like, because your aesthetic has changed over the years?
It's completely changed, and, you know, I'll look back and I'm like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
That's the worst thing I can possibly generate. But I don't know, maybe it's a good thing. It's telling me, oh, okay, at least I evolved as an artist and as a designer to make that judgment call. But it's such a good indicator of, you know, it's just telling myself, like, hey, I guess I've changed my palette, I've changed my taste, and aesthetically I'm kind of evolving.
So this is, again, the brush pen.
This is the brush pen.
And were these, I don't know, you've also made a lot of physical models, right? I know
Yes.
you kit bash a lot of models.
Yeah.
Was this part of that sequence?
This was exactly part of that same.
Were you drawing some of the things that you built?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was doing a lot of studies from the kits that I made. I think a lot of people call them scratch building, but essentially you're kit bashing, you know, model parts, model kits from, you know, World War II planes to Jeeps to, you know, Gundam. Or you know, Armored Core, and you're just kind of assembling them in your own way, and just coming up with really cool shapes.
And then you would light them, and then you would do your studies from those.
Yeah.
And so in a way it's a lot like doing the figure pieces we looked at before.
Yep.
But now it's mechanical shapes.
But it's not mechanical
But
design.
all the shadow shapes are there for you.
Yeah.
So it's a significantly easier thing than doing it from your imagination.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you had to build the damn model first.
You have to build it.
Yeah. Well,
you have to build the model. This is something a little bit more looser. I've just kind of took that whole contour drawing and just, these almost look like scribbles, and that was kind of the intention, because there's so much effort and stress that goes into doing a pretty drawing.
Oh, I know.
And I wanted to just kind of ditch it and say, you know what, screw this thing. I'm going to do a really crappy drawing, but I want to see if I can come up with really good ideas.
I've done that before. What's interesting is if you draw for a long time and you build so much muscle memory into doing nice drawings, right, that when you try to do a sloppy drawing, it's actually difficult.
It is.
Like to draw this loose, I find to be quite a challenge. Get your, to loosen up that much.
Yeah.
But when you can get it going and let go, the speed goes way up.
The speed goes by ×5.
Yeah, at least.
I mean, it's not to say that you're guaranteed a good design. Because I look at these.
No, you're never guaranteed a good design.
These are incredibly bad, but it was a very liberating experience.
It is, and that's why I draw sometimes with my opposite hand, my left hand instead.
Yeah.
And you're not anticipating that you should get any nice looking drawings.
Yeah.
But it does free you up to just think about, you know, shapes without the constraint of trying to make a beautiful sketch.
Yeah, totally.
So I see you do this a lot. You do like a nice little thumbnail, right? Trying to find the overall silhouette. And then you found one here that you liked.
I think I found components in here that I then translated it onto this line drawing.
Okay.
But yeah, this is something that I've, you know, by the way, these are all just class demos, and I was trying to explain the thought process from going 2D to doing something a little bit more 3D. There's definitely a huge jump here.
Yes.
But generally, my mind kind of starts with a silhouette. Right?
Yeah, mine too. It's the easiest and the fastest.
It's the easiest and the fastest, and it's the most quickest way to kind of judge whether you're committed to that design. And just like looking at anything, really, you're going to look at the overall proportion, the overall impression, and then kind of look into the details.
And this is, again, it looks like a little bit of light marker block in first.
Yeah, this is the light marker. I started off doing just the underlay, and then
is that
went
like a
on top.
1 or a 2 or something? Or even, I even use a 0.
I think this was a number 2, a 20% gray Copic marker.
Uh-huh.
And then these were here. I actually didn't use any marker on these. These were just using the ballpoint pen. But this paper, it's actually fairly thick.
Yeah, and it has a nice tooth. It's quite a rough surface.
And you can get really light with the lines.
Yep.
So
what's your favorite ballpoint nowadays?
I honestly don't know.
Don't you just use whatever ballpoints around?
I found myself using some of those ones that you get from Century 21, the free giveaways.
Yeah.
Or I'll accidentally steal pens from a restaurant when you're signing your name.
Yep.
And some people ask me like, "What are you using?" I'm like, "I don't know where I got this, man.
That's
But this is awesome."
I think a lot of it has to do with the paper.
Yeah, it
right?
does. It does.
The rougher the paper, the more forgiving it is, and that you can draw lighter.
Yeah.
If it's smooth paper, like your favorite paper, right? Did you like to do the marker and high-tech pen?
Yeah.
That's super smooth. That's really hard to use a ballpoint.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard.
So if you guys are wanting to do ballpoint pen sketches like these, do yourself a favor and get some paper that has a nice tooth, right? And that means that it's nice and rough. And then that allows you to draw a lighter line.
Yeah.
It'll make it so much easier.
So here's some interior cockpits.
Cool. So I always find when I'm drawing these, and it's again ballpoint, I can see very lightly done, but you really have to know general human proportion.
Yeah.
Not necessarily anatomy so much, but big gross anatomy like a hip point or shoulders, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you really need to try and imagine first the proportions of a human body.
Yeah.
Right, because anytime we see a seat or a sofa or any chair, we want to imagine ourselves in that chair.
Exactly.
And especially like these cockpits, we want to imagine that we're the pilot of that mech or that ship, whatever
Exactly.
it is. So how do you try to get that at first? Where do you start? You start by drawing you've memorized or studied enough the basic angles of the seat.
I think the basic angles and maybe a lot of these little secondary and tertiary details come from looking at a real jet cockpit or something like that. But the ergonomics, the actual idea of creating a cockpit for a single passenger or rider really comes from kind of looking at a chair, right?
Yep.
Looking at even the chair that we sit on all day drawing, and looking at the base of that thing, and if this is big enough to fit your butt,
Yep.
I think that it's enough to hold. It's enough volume to seat one person, because a lot of times I see a lot of interiors that are done even from myself where the seat is way too big and it throws the scale off, and I think
Yeah.
scale is a huge component.
Well, yeah, especially with seats and interiors. I see it on automotive interiors, and people really get the position of the steering wheel wrong,
Yeah.
relationship to the front of where the seat is.
Yeah.
And then also the size of the steering wheel
Yeah.
is always usually microscopic.
Yeah, it's usually microscopic.
Compared to the size of the seat, and it's usually
Yeah.
way out in front where maybe your feet could just touch it.
Exactly.
Right? But there's no way you're going to be able to fit or use that interior.
Yeah.
There's another one. Do you find a challenge when trying to draw and detail the inside of a surface versus the outside?
I do from a detailed standpoint, because sometimes I forget, or I got to remind myself like what's in a cockpit,
Mm-hmm.
And obviously this drawing is kind of a bad representation of that, because I felt like I could have done a little bit more research and done myself a favor and just kind of looked at some Googled some images or look at some books and just kind of look at are there buttons, what do the consoles look like, what's the
Yeah.
spacing look like.
I think
yeah.
if you're like me, that once you start to be able to understand basic perspective, and then you can sort of draw anything with that
Yeah.
skill set, you tend to forget about doing proper research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can get away with sort of drawing anything, from your imagination. You do, and then you're like, oh wait a minute, but that's not even remotely correct. I should have gone and done the research,
Yep.
right? Because we want to jump too fast into the drawing.
Exactly.
So it is always it's tough to remind yourself to go and do the proper research.
It is.
I would do better drawings if I did that. So, but it is a tough reminder. There's another one.
So yeah, these are just some more mech sketches. Again, with the same technique, using the marker underlay. This is again, I think the 10 or 20%. Just kind of experimenting with just more of the mechanical language that's going on here.
Yeah. I noticed that you oftentimes very much you push the gesture of the legs, sort of maybe beyond the functional, logical conclusion for a mech.
Because this would never stand.
Right, but they have a lot of character as a result.
Yeah, and I treated them like, what would it look like if you were to pose a human being, right? You're not going to just do a stiff standing pose.
Right.
But maybe, just like a mech. Because I find that mechs are a little bit boring to look at if they're straight on.
Yeah, and I mean, if they're posed in a logical engineering pose, which is how they would be 90% of the time,
right.
They're just boring as hell to draw.
Exactly.
Right? And perfectly symmetrical, and the legs are parallel to each other. And so, yeah, you've got to infuse, especially when you don't have the color and the environment, you have to infuse a little more life. And I notice you do that a lot with your characters. You put a person in there for scale, and you always have them doing something, which is awesome.
You always gotta have them pull or anchor something,
or knitting, or
knitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or cooking some noodles, something that doesn't make sense. And here's some more underlays here. This is generally kind of
that's
how I'll start.
Super light.
Super light here.
Yep.
This is probably 10 to 15 minutes into a drawing.
It's a great way to start. Okay, so we're going to finish this segment with John looking at one of his retro sketchbooks here.
Yeah.
This is what, 8 years old?
Yeah, this is 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, so this is way back. This is like when you first started. You probably had always drawn mechs, right? But this, you really started trying to draw them.
Yeah, I think I mean I've tried drawing robots, but this is when I was taking classes with Scott Robertson.
Who's that?
Yeah,
I have heard of him. Yeah,
you've heard of Scott. Pretty amazing. You should probably take his classes.
I should take his classes. I told you I forget all the time to even do visual research anymore.
But what was fun about this book was I actually dedicated it to one subject matter, and it's just all walkers. So,
okay. And this is when you bound this yourself, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
I remember you were like totally in love with this paper.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is when you were an intern with me, and you're like, dude, you got to try this paper. I love it.
I was a total salesman.
Yeah.
I was like trying to convince you every single day. This guy,
and I was
try
like,
this out.
John, it's too smooth. It's too smooth. I can't use it. I can't do a ballpoint pen sketch on it. I've got no control. Yeah. So I can't do it. So, and I came around a little bit. And now I can do it with marker and high-tech pen, but I still can't do ballpoint on the super smooth. Anyway, so then you're like, you just get a stack of this and you bind it yourself. And so that was this book. So this is some print. This looks like a print.
Yeah, this is a print. I ended up, because I was still learning Photoshop at the time.
I remember your first Photoshop one was like on one of the projects, and you rendered, but it was like you really got in there because now you could zoom in and zoom in.
Exactly.
And you kept zooming.
Maybe this is the way you're supposed to paint.
And it was like.
And then you looked over at me and Ben looked over at me. You're like, what is this guy doing? I'm like, guys, I'm getting a handle of this, guys.
Yeah. And
this is like, awesome.
3 hours on one little
little eyeball.
Yeah.
And I was basically pixel pushing.
Yes.
So a lot of these were, I was scanning in my sketches, and then I was just doing a value study. And I think this is when I was still in your how to render.
Just the value class.
Basic. Yeah. We're learning how to render cubes and spheres. Yeah. And I was like, all right, where does the foreshadow go on these guys? And I just totally shot myself in the foot because some of these forms are really complex.
Yeah, they're tough. Yep. But they still read. I mean, generally you got it. But it's fun to go way back and look at these and see, how much better you've gotten, both with your draftsmanship, but also the design ideas.
So here's some more of the brush pen experimentation here.
Right, and this is like, you hadn't used the brush pen that much. Because I remember that we started using it, I think, here at the studio.
Yeah, I think you introduced it to me. It was the beginning of Alien Race. And,
right, yep. Oh, that's right. I was trying to draw some racers for that with the brush pen, and then got you going on it.
Yeah.
You took to it much faster than I did, but it's really... No, they're nice. I still like this technique of trying to just show the shadow side. It's so efficient.
Yeah.
It's tough. but it's so efficient. And when you screw it up, you're done.
You're done.
You just go on to the next.
You got to just move on and learn from your mistakes.
Yep.
And I instantly fell in love with it when you showed me, and a couple of the other authors on Alien Race, Justin Pichot-Rungzi, Tom Tannery, and Peter Chan, they were just rocking on these sketches. And I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to try that. So instantly, I just picked one up. I've just been using it ever since.
You know, there's some really nice moments, and what's great is that you can just scan that high res, right, and then go back into Photoshop and paint it. I think there are some that even you could even rework today.
Oh yeah.
You know, with your abilities where they are now, some of these are still very functional.
Yeah.
And then you just do a little. If you want to clean that up in Photoshop, the really easy thing to do is color dodge to white, right, or just do a levels adjustment, and all that gray can go away.
Yep.
You know, and your silhouette will be clean again.
I think I'd probably maybe that's the only interesting one for me.
It's quite interesting.
Just for the shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fun.
Let's go on to this other side here.
So what's this technique?
So this was actually kind of the beginning of when I was using the marker. I believe this is my first semester at Art Center. And
wow.
You showed me, you kind of introduced the class of, doing an underlay with the marker and kind of going over with the ballpoint.
You know, and that technique's been around forever because that's what Joe Johnston and all those and Doug does that.
Doug Chang.
But even Joe Johnston was way before Doug.
Right.
But even those guys, the Ralph McQuarrie era.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it was originally just watercolor washes and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the markers take the place of that, and so this technique is not, nobody really owns it. It's been around for a long time. People have popularized it for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, Doug, of recent era, really popularized it. But it's a great technique. It's kind of like you get to do your overlay, but all within the same drawing.
So I'll take you over here to this page. So I'll give a little bit of a backstory on this one. I was out just doing observational drawing and, going to the zoo or going outside, and I was just really uncomfortable with the idea of introducing a new subject in this book. So I looked at a fire hydrant that was nearest to me. I was like, I'm going to turn that into a robot. That was it. I just did a bunch of watercolor washes on here.
Did you do the wash after, or did you start the sketch with the wash?
I actually started with the wash, and this was something that was a little bit new to me, where it literally felt like drawing on top of ink blobs, right? Yeah. And so it was just kind of more about the initial proportion, the initial, just kind of the silhouette and the volumes that you get from it, and then going on top and then executing all the details and implementing some of your designs.
I think, this is a really valuable process of looking at something, right? And then just challenging yourself. How many variations can I do that are similar or inspired by that thing that I'm observing? Absolutely. Right? And if it started with that and all you did is, okay, there's the fire hydrant. I changed the proportions a little, right? And then you put on some legs. Yeah. Okay, look at that, step one. Okay, now what if I just fatten out the bottom of this? That's step two. And I cut off the top at an angle. Exactly. Right. Okay, now what if I change the proportions a little more and I stretch the legs a little? Exactly. Right. Okay, what if I stay with basically the same, move the legs out a little, and then put an arm with a hose, right? And then what if I offset the center, right? Yeah. And so in your mind, those are great things to think about and challenge yourself. And what do you have? 31 studies. Yeah. Right. The
possibilities are endless.
Once you realize they're endless, that's the thing, is that's the trick and that's the value as a designer, is once you realize you can look at anything and do endless variations, that has a lot of value. Absolutely. Because that's a big part of our job.
Yeah, because, a lot of times you'll find yourself in that roadblock. You just get stuck on an idea. That just means you haven't done enough.
Right, and you're just tired. Yeah. You're tired of thinking. Your brain is tired because it's not, once you're in the rhythm and you've done it as an exercise, it's not actually that hard. Right. But you forget, you get lazy, you get tired, and you think, I can't come up with another one. And you're like, wait a minute. I remember like 8 years ago, I could sit down and come up with these things endlessly. So what's going on? How come that's not happening for me today? Yeah. And it's not because you're out of ideas. It's because you're basically tired and abandoning your process. Yeah.
Such a good reminder to look at all this stuff. Like, man.
Yeah, so these are really, you're drawing through all of that.
Yeah.
At this point. So
Complete draw through.
yeah, and that's also the way I think to then start to do better thumbnail sketches that are like those light and shadow ones.
Yep.
Is that I try to tell students this over and over, and when we're in a school situation, we just force them to do it, right?
Right,
So,
right.
because knowing that slowing down and drawing everything is the way to draw the fast, accurate thumbnails where you guess.
Yeah.
But if you just guess from the beginning, you just try to practice guessing more and more and more,
Yeah.
thinking you're going to get better, it never happens.
It never does, and it's always a hit or miss kind of deal.
Yeah.
And that's a gamble. And I found that drawing through, you're kind of really testing your design, or testing whatever you're creating, and it's like almost reverse engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of like X-ray vision, like looking at all the components. Even though they're not accurate, you're actually still plotting, and you're still figuring out things volumetrically. How far does this go back? You know, what does it look on the flip side?
Right, and it's important to know, like, where does that poke out on the backside if I'm
Exactly.
casting the shadow this way, because it might actually influence the shape of my shadow.
Exactly.
And some assembly views here, trying to figure out all the bits and pieces.
Yeah, some exploded views, whatnot. And we go to one of my personal favorite exercises here. I call this the broccoli series, and
I remembered you doing the broccoli series.
yeah, this is it was really cool. And
It was you and some other students were doing this thing, like taking you had a subject,
Yeah.
right, and then you would take something as your form inspiration,
yeah,
and you force yourself to use the forms from the observation piece
yep,
and create something.
yeah.
Right? So this was one of those
And
exercises.
this was one of those exercises. Yeah, and we were hanging out after lunch at Art Center, and one of my good friends, Albertine, I don't know if he brought the broccoli. In my mind, in my story, in my version, he brought the broccoli
Okay,
to the
we'll
table.
go with that one.
And everyone was like, "What are we gonna do today? What should we practice as a group?" And someone just yelled out, "Let's draw that broccoli. Maybe we can come up with something interesting." And I saw that as a challenge. I think everyone saw it as a challenge, and we just started drawing broccolis. And we were like, it looked like we were crazy
Yeah,
because we were geeking out about a piece of vegetable that we take for granted and we don't need as a kid, and then now we're looking at it as a source of inspiration. And the cool thing was, it was like looking at the broccoli, but looking more about the form language, kind of the structures that it stems out, the bristles that are on the top, and eventually using that towards your design and seeing if you can come up with interesting designs and stories and moments for this stuff.
well, I think that, you're taking it one step beyond, right, what a classic illustration student or, a fine artist would do, and trying, maybe not so much a fine artist because they work very abstractly, but definitely an illustrator would look at the broccoli and turn to different positions and just do broccoli studies.
Right.
And these would all look like broccoli,
Right.
right? But it did help you to create new form language. So these don't even really look like broccoli to me.
No,
I mean,
yeah,
they're like
no.
walkers again, right?
Yeah.
Because you were in this Walker book,
Exactly.
right? Because I see this guy who's got like some control reins up here, like he's driving his broccoli around. But that's what's cool, is that you took it and went the designer mode, right? Where you took the inspiration from a form from nature,
Yeah.
and then you tried to let it inspire something totally original. And because you were already working in a sketchbook that you told yourself was going to just be walkers,
Right.
you ended up with these crazy organic walkers, right, based on broccoli.
Yeah.
That's really, really fun exercise.
Thank you. I think I have another page here. Yeah, these are just more of the same kind of experiment of using broccoli.
So did you find then that you started by being more literal? Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I ended up doing some characters that are, or some walkers that are, it's literally a broccoli with legs on it.
Yeah.
And you challenge yourself, like, what can I do differently? What's next?
Because now it's like you've almost not really forgotten the broccoli, because it's hard to, like, if you showed this to anybody, nobody's going to say, oh, broccoli.
Right.
Right. But it started you down a path, right? A mental path of
Right.
form language. And then as you drew the form more and more, and you made those forms more sort of, internal to
Yeah.
yourself, then you started to abstract them. And where I can see now that these are maybe have started from the broccoli thing, but now when I look at them, they don't relate to that at all.
Yeah, they look like monsters or something
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah, and so I think I see that exercise, if you stick with it long enough,
Yeah.
and that's where this like quick side view thumbnail, repetitive nature, right, is much more about design process, and that's it's a lot of times tough for people to stick with because it's not about doing a nice drawing.
Yeah, it's not. It's just purely about the idea. Because I think there's something about an idea versus doing a great illustration is if you can actually separate the two, you can actually focus on, one area versus the other. And I told myself in these series of drawings, I'm just going to focus on just the idea, not the illustration, because I think I can probably now take one of these guys, put photo textures, paint it up, light it, and illustrate it and compose it in a scene. But the idea is something that just doesn't come out of nowhere,
Yeah, it's something you have to work on. And that's one great exercise to do that. So last page.
I think this is the last page. Yeah, this is
the final.
Just I think this is it looks like the high-tech C with the water brush pen. But I tried doing some vehicles, and I for some reason I still like this page. It's very nostalgic because I was so in love with this Art Deco kind of shape, these rounded forms, very simplistic, and very steampunk. I was into steampunk when I was doing this, and it's just really nostalgic looking at this page.
Well, it's fun for me too to see the stuff way back when you were my student, 8+ years ago.
I still feel like your student.
Yeah,
I'm always learning.
Hardly, you're teaching me now. It's awesome. These books are so inspiring.
That's hilarious.
So inspiring.
That's like the first joke ever.
Yeah.
All right, well, Scott, thank you so much for inviting me today.
Oh, thank you. I'll put a link up to John's sketchbook company and his blog where you can see now what he's gone on to do with his amazing. I was just looking at it the other day, actually. There's some amazing Photoshop environments you're doing now. Some really killer stuff from the movies you've worked on, the games you've worked on. Some really excellent stuff.
Thank you.
Super proud of you, and fun to see what you do in the future.
Thank you very much.
So keep kicking ass.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Bye.